They gave me the new ship on a Thursday. That detail has no strategic significance. I include it only because everything that followed felt so disproportionate to a Thursday. The smell of fresh sealant still in the corridors, the consoles still running their calibration cycles, crew still learning where the heads were. 4 days earlier, IN's Unbroken Meridian had been a name on a commissioning plaque and a set of specs in an Admiralty folder. She was not yet a warship in the way that word implies experience. She was a hull with ambitions. She had never fired her primary batteries in anger. Crew had never been in combat. Her captain, me, Sarah Vale, Commander First Class, 17 years in the Terran Compact Fleet, had fought twice before aboard aging destroyers that smelled of burnt circuits and old fear. She had not. None of that mattered when the fold jump deposited us into the Vorketh kill zone at 0417 hours ship time. I'm writing this in the medical ward because my right arm is in a splint, and I have been told I am not permitted to do paperwork in the actual command chair until the bone regeneration finishes. The surgeon is a small, meticulous man named Petrov who expressed this prohibition with the calm of someone who has long since stopped caring whether officers comply. I have complied because Petrov is right about most things, and because the command chair is currently occupied by a damage control team cutting out a section of scorched structural member that used to be part of the secondary helm console. It doesn't look like a place a person should sit anyway, so I am writing this here, with my good hand, because someone needs to record what happened. And because I was there, most of the people who were also there are either in this same ward or in compartments we do not speak of yet. I will start with what I knew before the jump. The Vor sovereignty and the Keth Dominion have been at war for 314 years. Our intelligence on this fact is better than our intelligence on most flying things because neither of them has ever paid much attention to us. We are small. We are recent. We occupy a modest bubble of systems on the far edge of the Vor's southern frontier, and for most of those 314 years. The Vor have been too busy bleeding against the Keth to do much more than file a notice with their frontier registry that we exist. The Keth, for their part, know about us the way a man fighting a crocodile knows about the moth on the wall. Behind him, we are noted, we are irrelevant. This is not an insult, it is accurate. The war between the sovereignty and the Dominion is not a border skirmish. It is not a resource dispute with an exit condition. It is a civilizational grinding. Two ancient, enormous powers that have been consuming each other for so long that the original cause has been gotten by everyone alive on either side. The Keth are a consensus, thousands of distributed cognition nodes linked across their fleet. No single commander, no single mind, every ship an equal voice in a collective decision architecture that can reorient a battle plan in under 6 seconds. The Vor are something more like an empire with a professional military class, hierarchical, tradition-bound, extraordinarily lethal, operating under a command structure that has been refined across 3 centuries of war against the Keth, and nothing else. They are both, by any reasonable measure, incomprehensibly dangerous. Our job at the Terran Compact Fleet was to stay small and quiet, and not become interesting to either of them. I want to be clear that we were attempting to do exactly that. The full jump to the Seleth crossing was a navigation exercise. That is what the orders said. IN's Unbroken Meridian was 4 days out of commissioning, and the Admiralty wanted a full-power fold test on the new compression drive before we deployed to the marginal surveys. The Seleth crossing is a wide transit corridor 6 light hours from the nearest inhabited system. Empty space, historically. The fold jump was meant to take us there, hold position for 2 hours of systems diagnostics, and return. 6 hours total. Home before breakfast. Navigation Officer Tenrick had run the coordinates 3 times. I had checked them myself. What none of us had, because our intelligence apparatus is modestly funded, and the war between 2 ancient civilizations does not announce its appointments to third phase, was the information that the Keth consensus had chosen the Seleth crossing as the staging ground for a flanking engagement against the Vor hammer array, and that the Vor hammer array, 5,000 ships under Admiral Patriarch Davin Sue, had come to meet them. We jumped into the middle of it. I have thought carefully about how to describe the next 4 seconds, and I have concluded that no description is adequate. The fold point resolved and my forward optical feeds showed me a wall of Keth ships to port, stretching from the upper display boundary to the lower, across roughly 340 degrees of observable space. 9,000 vessels, so we later determined, arranged in the distributed floating lattice formation the Keth consensus favors, because it allows any section to reinforce any other without centralized coordination. To starboard, the Vor hammer array, a different architecture entirely, ranks and columns, dreadnoughts forward and missile carriers staggered behind 5,000 ships in a tight fighting formation that had been developed over 3 centuries to counter exactly the kind of distributed Keth lattice currently arrayed against them. Between them, IN's Unbroken Meridian. The Meridian is a Sovereign-class fleet dreadnought. She is 4.2 kilometers long. Her armor is reactive composite over an osmium alloy frame. She carries 36 primary mass driver batteries and 8 spinal rail mounts that can put a kinetic penetrator through a capital ship at 40,000 kilometers. She has magazines deep enough to sustain a fleet engagement for 11 hours without resupply. She is, by the standards of the Terran Compact Fleet, the largest and most capable warship we have ever built. By the standards of what was surrounding us, she was a moth. I am not being falsely modest. The Keth ships averaged 800 meters in length and there were 9,000 of them. The Vor hammer array's lead dreadnoughts ran 2.1 kilometers, and they had 5,000. We were one ship, alone, 4 days out of commissioning, with a crew that was still finding the heads. The rational expected outcome of that situation, the outcome that the laws of physics and tactics and common sense would all agree on, was that we were going to die. What actually happened requires some explanation. First 4 seconds were silence. Not the silence of space, which is its own thing, but the silence of 14,000 ships simultaneously encountering a sensor return that did not match any file in any archive. I know this because we were reading their targeting and communication emissions. And for 4 full seconds those emissions stopped. Every Keth cognition node was querying every other cognition node. Every Vor combat intelligence was cross-referencing its classification library against the silhouette of what had just appeared between the 2 fleets. Nothing came back. We were not in any archive. We did not match any known hull class. We were not a Keth ship. We were not a Vor ship. We were not a neutral registry vessel or an explorer class or a salvage craft. We did not match the signature profile of any civilization either side had ever catalogued, and, in 314 years of war against each other, they had catalogued everything worth knowing about in this region of space, including apparently us, except they had filed us as a notation, not a threat profile, irrelevant, too small, too new, not worth the data storage. 4 seconds, 14,000 warships paused, because they encountered something they had no file for. In that 4-second gap I gave the orders that I believe, that I choose to believe, made the difference. Weapons free, full power to point defense. Stand by for engagement from multiple vectors. Do not maneuver toward either fleet. Hold position. I want to explain that last order because it is the one I still think about. If I had maneuvered, if I had turned toward either fleet, or away from either fleet, or begun an evasive course, I would have communicated something. Motion toward the Keth would have read, to the Vor, as a vessel choosing sides. Motion toward the Vor would have read, to the Keth, the same. Motion away from both would have read as panic. And panicked vessels are destroyed first because they are making themselves easy targets. Holding position communicated nothing, which in that specific moment was the only defensible choice. It communicated that I was not afraid, or that I was too stupid to be afraid, or that I had a reason not to be afraid. At least one of things was true. Ensign Faro on tactical, 23 years old, and had never been in combat. She had been training in simulators for 4 years, and in this moment she was excellent. She had weapons charged before I finished speaking. She did not ask for confirmation. She did not ask what the plan was. She read the board and she was ready, and because of that readiness, when the Vor fired first, we were not caught with our systems cycling. The Vor were first because the Vor have a command structure. One decision, from Admiral Patriarch Devon Su, navigated down a hierarchy in under 2 seconds. His assessment, we later learned, was that the unknown vessel was likely a Keth probe or decoy of a type not previously encountered, and that destroying it was therefore consistent with the engagement plan already underway. His standing orders allowed him to fire on any unclassified vessel in a combat zone without further authorization. He fired 2 VOR capital-grade missiles incoming, range 41,000 kilometers. Time to impact, 9 seconds. Ensign Faro killed 17 of them with point defense. I killed 4 with decoy countermeasures. 1 hit us. I will be honest about what that hit felt like. It felt like the end of the world. The Meridian shuddered from stem to stern. Compartment 7 Delta lost pressure. 3 people died before the seal doors closed. The starboard forward sensor array was blinded. Petrov's medical bay, which is where I am writing this, was thrown into emergency lighting for 47 seconds before primary power restored. I had been gripping the arm of the command chair, and now I was gripping it harder because the Keth had registered the VOR strike, and they were drawing a conclusion. The Keth consensus concluded, in its distributed, 6-second way, that the unknown vessel was a VOR asset because the VOR had just struck it and it had not struck back at the VOR. In the logic of the consensus, a target that does not return fire against its attacker is either disabled or allied with its attacker. Since we were clearly not disabled, we had killed 17 of 22 inbound missiles with observable competence. We were probably VOR. The Keth consensus therefore opened fire. 112 Keth interdiction beams port side. Faro did what she could. The Meridian's reactive armor did what it was designed to do. Our point defense is excellent by compact fleet standards. By the standards of a simultaneous Keth interdiction barrage, our point defense is an umbrella in a river. 6 beams penetrated. Section 12 through 17 on the port dorsal hull went dark. We lost the primary communications array. We lost one of the 8 spinal rail mounts. Chief Engineer Borak, who is also currently in this medical bay, and who is dealing with her injuries with a stoicism that I find both admirable and slightly alarming, reported 17 secondary systems cascading offline because 3 of them were load-bearing for the other 14. The Meridian was damaged. She was not retreating. She was not dying. This is the part that I think confused both of them. A vessel that has just taken strikes from 2 directions simultaneously. 1 VOR missile impact and 6 Keth interdiction beams in under 30 seconds should, in the logic of both the VOR hammer array and the Keth consensus, be either destroyed or disengaging. The kill rate on first contact engagements in the VOR-Keth war is extremely high. Ships do not typically absorb that kind of combined fire and remain operational. The compact fleet's engineering team that designed the Meridian's layered armor had never intended it to be tested against both sides of a 300-year war simultaneously. They had designed her to fight one war. She was, as it turned out, well built enough for 1.5. She was still there. Her engines were still running, and she was firing back. I had told Faro weapons free, and Faro had interpreted that correctly. Could not fire at both fleets. Even I understood that. But what we could do, what I ordered, fire at the incoming weapons before they hit us. And fire at the weapons before those weapons, in a cascade that bought us time, and demonstrated a capability that neither fleet had anticipated. The Meridian's spinal rail mounts, even with one gone, can fire at ranges that exceed the Keth interdiction beam's effective envelope. Faro began picking off Keth weapons platforms at 55,000 kilometers, ranges at which the Keth consensus had not expected engagement from a vessel of our apparent class. The four saw this and drew a new conclusion. This is when things became complicated in a way that I find difficult to write about, calmly. The VOR military taxonomy is hierarchical and ancient. When the VOR hammer array saw an unknown vessel absorbing strikes from the Keth and returning fire at Keth weapons platforms at ranges exceeding VOR capabilities, Admiral Patriarch Davin Su's classification system tried to fit us into an existing category. We were not a Keth vessel, we were firing at the Keth. We had not returned fire at the VAR after their initial strike. In the VAR taxonomy, this pattern corresponds to one thing: a vessel from a third party that is choosing sides, specifically their side, and is demonstrating extraordinary capability. The Admiral Patriarch held his fire. For 47 seconds, the VOR hammer array held its fire, and watched us fight the Keth. I didn't know this at the time. At the time, I was managing 3 damage control teams, a blind sensor array, borax cascade failures, Faro's weapons track, and I was aware that the Vor had stopped shooting at us, but I did not know why, and I was too busy to speculate. I assigned Navigator Tenric to watch the Vor fleet's posture and tell me if anything changed. He told me with admirable precision, "They're watching us, ma'am." I told him to keep watching them. The Keth consensus, meanwhile, was recalculating. The Keth consensus does not recalculate quickly. This is not a weakness. It is the architecture of a distributed mind. No single node can be wrong decisively. Every node must be updated before the whole can change course. In the 6 seconds it takes the consensus to reorient, a great deal can happen. What happened in this specific 6-second window was that the Meridian spinal batteries destroyed 11 Keth weapons platforms and 2 Keth light interdiction cruisers that had been maneuvering into close engagement range, and our fire pattern made it evident that we could track and engage targets across the full Keth lattice at ranges the Keth had not allocated to a vessel of our size class. Keth consensus updated. The new assessment. This was not a Vor vessel. This was not a vessel in any known taxonomy. This was an unknown of demonstrated lethality, operating in a mode inconsistent with any catalogued civilization. The Keth consensus flagged us as high priority. 96 broke from the lattice formation and began closing on us from the port side. This is the moment I remember most clearly, and I remember it clearly because I was frightened in a very specific way. Not the diffuse, buzzing fear of the initial jump, but a precise, focused fear with a shape and a direction which is actually less bad than the other kind. 96 Keth ships. We had established that we could fight. We had not established that we could fight 96 Keth ships at close range, with 1 spinal mount, offline, dorsal sensors blind. I did the only thing I could do. I told Faro to engage the lead elements, and I told Tenric to send the emergency hail. Our standard compact fleet emergency hail protocols for situations where you are in combat with an unknown force. There is not a standard protocol for situations where you are in combat with 2 forces simultaneously, neither of which you intended to engage, in the middle of someone else's war, on a navigation exercise. Tenric constructed one on the spot. The hail went out on every frequency we had. In the Vor standard band, and in the Keth broad-spectrum signal architecture that our intelligence division had catalogued, and it said, in the most direct language Tenric could manage, "We are a Terran compact vessel. We are not a participant in this conflict. We entered this area in error. We are not allied with either party. We are defending ourselves. We request cessation of hostilities. This is a reasonable thing to say." It is also in the context of a 300-year war between 2 civilizations that have no diplomatic framework. That includes a third party, a statement that neither side had any procedure for receiving. The Keth consensus received it and had no file for it. The Vor received it and had no protocol for it. Both of them were still shooting at us. What happened next took 4 hours. I've reviewed the engagement logs 7 times in this medical bay, partly for the after-action report, and partly because I keep expecting to find something I missed, some decision I made wrong, some order that cost more than it needed to. What I have found each time is that I made a series of decisions under conditions for which no training exists, and that most of them were defensible, and that some of them were the right call in ways I did not fully understand until afterward. The first hour, the Meridian held position and fought the approaching Keth elements while the Vor watched. Faro killed 63 Keth ships in the first hour. This is not a number I am comfortable with. I am writing it because it is accurate, and because the record requires it. We killed 63 ships with their crews. People, or whatever the Keth consensus considers equivalent to people, the distributed nodes that form individual cognition. Because they had closed to a range at which we could not avoid killing them without maneuvering, and I had decided not to maneuver. Their weapons killed 8 of my crew and blinded another sensor array. I want to say something about those 8 people. Their names are in the formal casualty report that the Admiralty has already received, and they will be in the memorial log that I will submit when the Meridian is cleared for repair. I am not going to list them here because a list is not what they are. What they are is the permanent answer to anyone who wants to ask whether holding position was the right call. I believed it was the right call. I still believe it was the right call. I made the call knowing that right and without cost are different things, and that most military decisions exist in the space between those two words. But I do not want the record to show we held position without also showing that holding position was not free. It never is. At the 56-minute mark, the Keth consensus did something I had not expected. It withdrew the 96 ships to a standoff range, not a retreat, a repositioning. The consensus was studying us the way a system studies a new variable, pulling back far enough to observe without suffering further losses close enough to reinforce or re-engage. It was, in its distributed, 6-second way, deciding what we were. I want to explain what that withdrawal felt like from inside the ship. Not tactically, it was a temporary reduction in incoming fire, an opportunity to assess our own damage, which we took. I mean the thing underneath the tactical. The Keth consensus sent 96 ships to destroy us. 63 of those ships were gone. The remaining 33 withdrew. This is not the behavior of a force that is confident in its assessment of you. This is the behavior of a force that has encountered data inconsistent with its model. And in that moment, with the shooting reduced to a standoff rate and the main Keth lattice holding, and the Warhammer array watching from starboard, I became aware of something I had not had the time to be aware of before. Both of them were paused, not because they were beaten, not because we had won anything, or threatened them in any way that mattered at the scale of either of their fleets, because we were a thing they had not expected to find, and we were still there, and the calculation about what to do with us was running in two separate, ancient, incompatible command architectures simultaneously, and neither calculation had finished yet. The Meridian, 4 days out of commissioning, had become the most interesting object in the Seleth crossing. Not the most dangerous, not the most powerful, the most interesting. In the logic of both the Keth consensus and the Warhammer array, interesting and dangerous are not the same category, but they are adjacent. And in the 47 seconds before the Vor decided to hold their fire, I think what happened is that the distinction between those two categories became, for both sides, worth examining before acting. It took 11 minutes to let Borak's team stabilize the cascade failures and let Faro run a full weapons check. Then I hailed again. Tenrik's second hail was longer. We had had 56 minutes to work on it, we explained, in terms as plain as our combined knowledge of Keth signal architecture could achieve. We are from the third-party civilization you have noted as irrelevant on your southern frontier. We have no conflict with the Keth dominion. We have no conflict with the Vor sovereignty. Our presence here is an error of navigation. We are willing to withdraw if both parties will permit it. We are not willing to be destroyed. That last sentence was my addition. Tenrik had left it out. I put it back in. I want to be precise about why. It was not a threat. We were one ship. We were damaged. We could not threaten 14,000 ships, and it would have been absurd to try. What it was a statement of fact. We were not willing to be destroyed, and we had spent the last 56 minutes demonstrating what not willing to be destroyed meant in operational terms. We had been fired upon by both parties. We had not been destroyed. We were still there. The sentence made the connection explicit. The Keth consensus took 14 minutes to respond. In Keth broad spectrum signal architecture, which Tenrik translated with some difficulty, response was approximately acknowledged, third party identified, classification, unknown hostile, ending re-evaluation. Unknown hostile was an improvement over no file at all. I was encouraged. The Vor response came 3 minutes later and was shorter. It said, authorized your presence in this sector. I told Tenrik to respond, navigation error. No authorization. We are attempting to withdraw. The Vor response 17 seconds later. You cannot withdraw. The corridor is engaged. This was accurate. The fold jump window behind us required a minimum of 40 minutes of drive charging to activate. And in that 40 minutes, we would need to hold our position against whatever either side decided to do. The engaged corridor meant that maneuver options were constrained. Keth ships to port. Vor ships to starboard. A channel behind us, that the Keth lattice had partially occupied during the first hour, and the Vor main body between us and any lateral escape route. I was not honestly looking for permission to withdraw. I was buying time. Understood this without being told. The second hour was different from the first. Keth Consensus had repositioned its standoff elements to a distance of 80,000 kilometers and was not firing. The 96 ships that had closed were now 43 ships, because we had killed the other 53, and those 43 were holding. The main Keth lattice, the 9,000 ships that had arrived to fight the Vor, had not moved. They were watching. The Vor hammer array had not moved either. They were watching. And here is the thing I have thought about most. In this medical bay, Petrov checking my arm every 2 hours. Here is the part that matters. Both of them were watching each other watch us. This is not a thing I understood in the moment. In the moment I was managing Borax engineering reports and monitoring 2 sensor arrays and running engagement threat assessments with Faro. But in retrospect, with the luxury of the logs and the distance of 6 days, at the end of the first hour, the battle between the Keth Consensus and the Vor hammer array that had been the entire reason for this engagement had stopped. Not because a ceasefire had been negotiated, not because either side had achieved an objective, because there was something in the middle of the kill zone that neither side had a file for, and it was still there, and it was still dangerous. And in 314 years of war against each other, both the Keth Consensus and the Vor hammer array had developed very precise assessment instincts. And both of them were doing something unusual, which was attending to a threat they did not understand. In the second hour, the Vor hammer array fired at the Keth lattice, not at the Keth. A standard engagement strike, the kind of thing that had been routine for 3 centuries. 600 Vor capital missiles, targeting Keth lattice elements at the lattice's eastern flank. The Keth Consensus responded, the battle resumed, and we were in the middle of it. This is the part of the record that I expect future Admiralty readers to find implausible, so I will be very specific. We were not caught in the crossfire through bad luck or bad positioning. We were caught in the crossfire because we were between them, and we had decided not to move, and neither side had granted us safe passage. And the battle they had come here to fight was happening with or without our consent. Keth interdiction beams, targeting Vor dreadnoughts, passed through our position. 4 capital missiles tracking Keth lattice elements passed through our position. 11 of the beams that were targeting Vor ships had to be diverted by our point defense because their track ran through our hull. 4 Vor missiles had similar problems. Faro did not distinguish between Keth fire and Vor fire when it was incoming to our position. She killed what she could kill. This is in the logs. The weapons track for the second hour shows us intercepting and destroying ordnance from both sides with approximately equal frequency, which is an artifact of our geometry in the engagement, equidistant from both fleets, defending our hull, choosing a target. But it looked, from the outside, like something else. I realize this now. It did not occur to me in the moment, because I was too busy surviving. But if you are the Keth Consensus, watching an unknown vessel intercept your weapons fire at 80,000 kilometers, and you are simultaneously watching that same vessel intercept Vor weapons fire, you are watching a thing that is apparently fighting both sides at once, and it is still there, and it has now been there for 2 hours, and you have already sent 96 ships to destroy it, and it is still there. And if you are the Vor hammer array, and you are watching this same thing, the unknown vessel is not yours. It is not yours. It is intercepting weapons that are meant for the Keth, and it is intercepting Keth weapons that are meant for you, and it is holding the geographic center of the engagement, like a fixed point that neither side has been able to remove. Then you are watching something that does not fit into your 300-year-old taxonomy. What I think they were each privately calculating, and I am speculating here, because neither the Keth nor the Vor have been entirely forthcoming about their internal assessments, is what it means for the other side to have something like this and to have not mentioned it. If the Keth have a vessel class that can hold this position against combined fire, why has the Keth Consensus not deployed it? If the Vor have a hull type that can absorb this punishment, Why has the Hammer Array not seen it in 300 years of engagement? The answer to both questions, that the vessel belongs to neither of them, that it belongs to something else entirely, something small and recent and previously irrelevant, is the answer neither side reached in the second hour. They were still working within the assumption that what they were seeing had to belong to one of them, because the only other option was that there was something in this region of space that they had missed for 3 centuries, and that possibility had implications neither ancient civilization wanted to examine quickly. The second hour ended with us down to 6 functional spinal mounts, port dorsal entirely blind, one of Borak's main power conduits jury-rigged, and 197 crew remaining at their stations. We had started with 431. The math of that hour was the worst of the engagement. The Meridian was not invulnerable. She was resilient and well-engineered and commanded, I say without false modesty, by a crew that was performing above any reasonable expectation for a ship 4 days out of commissioning. But she was taking damage, and the damage was accumulating, and at some point accumulation becomes outcome. In the third hour, the shooting stopped. Both sides stopped firing at each other, and then they both fired at us. I want to be careful about how I characterize this, because I think the motivation matters, and I think it says something important. They did not coordinate. Tenric was monitoring every signal band we could read, and there was no communication between the Keth consensus and the Vor Hammer Array. Before this happened, the Keth fired at us from port. Approximately 90 seconds later, the Vor fired at us from starboard. 2 events were sequential, not simultaneous. Each side independently decided, in its own way, in its own command architecture, that the unknown thing in the middle of the kill zone needed to stop existing. I think this tells you something about what they were seeing. They were not destroying us because we were a threat in the normal military sense, because we were winning, or because we had allied with the other side, or because we had committed some act of aggression. They were destroying us because we were something they could not classify, and in 314 years of war between 2 civilizations that had cataloged everything they needed to know about the universe, unclassifiable things are not permitted to persist. The Keth consensus had 6 seconds to reach a distributed conclusion, and the conclusion was, remove the variable. The Vor Hammer Ray had a command hierarchy, and the command that came down from Admiral Patriarch Davin Su was effectively the same. Both of them separately decided to remove the variable. Faro and I had been in command of the same ship for 4 days. I had read her personnel file before commissioning. She had scored highest in her class at the Naval Training Institute on tactical assessment, 3rd highest on weapons systems, 2nd in the year on combat simulation response times. None of those numbers had told me what she would be like in an actual engagement. And the answer, which I now know with confidence, is that Ensign Faro is extraordinary. In the 42 seconds between the first Keth strike and the first Var strike in the 3rd hour, she made 8 targeting decisions, executed 4-point defense rotations, and called out 2 incoming VAR missile spreads by designation before the targeting computer had finished its track, because she was watching the Calcer VOR launch signatures and calculating the spread from the geometry. She was 23 years old, and she was doing things that combat veterans do, and she was doing them aboard a 4-day-old ship in the middle of someone else's war. The 3rd hour was the worst hour. We lost section 4 through 9 on the starboard side, a full quarter of the ship, sealed off, catastrophic. We lost 2 more spinal mounts. Preece. We lost Chief Warrant Officer Dasso, who had been running the secondary engineering console, and who had been in the fleet for 22 years and who I had served with on 2 previous postings, and who I will not describe here, because this is a record and not a eulogy. We lost 14 others in that section. The Meridian was on emergency power for 11 minutes and 37 seconds, while Borak's team rebuilt the distribution manifold from components that are not supposed to be used for distribution manifolds. I want to say something about those 11 minutes and 37 seconds, because they are the part of the engagement I remember most granularly. The main display was down. The weapons track was down. The only feeds I had were the emergency optical pickups on the hull exterior, low resolution, chrome, and Faro, calling out incoming threats from the backup targeting array. You understand, in those 11 minutes, what a ship actually is. It is not a weapon system. It is not a platform. It is a population. People in corridors trying to get to where they are needed. People in sealed compartments trying to keep systems running that were not designed to run under these conditions. People doing their jobs with the understanding that the people in the next section may not be doing theirs anymore, because the next section no longer exists as a pressurized space. Petrov told me later that in those 11 minutes his bay had received 7 crew members with injuries so severe that triage protocols meant he had to make decisions he does not want to talk about. He made them. He kept working. He is a small, meticulous man who expressed a medication prohibition to me with the calm of someone who has seen things he cannot undescribe. And I think that calm is not indifference. I think it is the particular weight that very competent people carry when they have done everything. And the math still came out the way the math came out. She was not retreating. She was not falling apart. She was damaged, and she was still there, and she was still answering. At the 2-hour 43-minute mark of the 3rd hour, the Keth consensus paused again. I did not understand why at the time. The log tells me what happened. One of the Keth's distributed cognition nodes, a fleet element in the lattice's eastern flank that had been engaged with the Vor's hammer array, experienced what the Keth would describe as a consensus break. A situation where one node's data is sufficiently inconsistent with the rest of the distributed calculation that it interrupts the whole. The node's data, in this case, was the observation that in 2 hours and 43 minutes of combined fire from the Keth Dominion and the Vor Sovereignty, the unknown vessel had not been destroyed. This sounds simple. It was not simple. The Keth consensus is a very precise calculation engine. Every node knows exactly how much combined ordnance has been expended against a target, what the expected damage accumulation is, and what the probability of survival for any known hull class should be at that damage level. The consensus had applied these calculations to the Meridian in real time. The Meridian's survival, at the damage levels she had absorbed, was not consistent with any known hull class in any archive. The Keth consensus paused to recalculate from the observed data rather than the archival data. This is a thing the consensus does rarely, because it is expensive. You are discarding 300 years of accumulated knowledge about what is and is not possible and asking all 9,000 ships to update simultaneously. It takes time. It takes resources. But the consensus did it because the observed data required it. The Vor, watching the Keth paused too. Admiral Pierre de Von Suze, whatever else he may be, is a commander who has fought the Keth consensus for 30 years of a 300-year war, and he knows what a consensus recalculation pause looks like. He knew something had forced the Keth to update their assessments. He did not know what. He did not fire into the pause. Those 7 minutes of silence were the quietest 7 minutes of my life. I used them to send a third hail. This one was mine more than Tenrick's, because by that point we had been at it for nearly 4 hours, and I was past being diplomatic in the way the Academy had taught me, and well into the kind of directness that exhaustion and loss produce. Tenrick translated it into Keth broad spectrum and Vor standard band as well as he could. And what it said was approximately this: we have been here for 4 hours. We have been struck by both parties. We have not been destroyed. We have not retreated. We have not allied with either of you. We are requesting one final time clearance to withdraw. If that clearance is not granted, we will continue to defend this vessel until we are destroyed or until the charges sufficiently to complete a fold. We do not want to fight you. We are not capable of winning against you. But we are capable of making this extremely difficult and expensive for a very long time, and you have now seen that this is true. Tenrick translated this. He told me afterward that the Keth broad spectrum version was somewhat more formal, and the Vor standard band version was somewhat more military in register, because those are the tones that work for each audience. I approved both without having heard them, because I trusted Tenrick, and because I was watching the board. Keth consensus completed its recalculation. I know what the recalculation produced because, years later, during the formal contact negotiations, a Keth consensus representative provided us with a translated summary of the distributed conclusions reached in that 7-minute pause. I include it here because it belongs in this record. The Keth consensus concluded, the unknown vessel, designated third-party anomaly, classification pending, has absorbed ordnance equivalent to the destruction of 11 known VOR capital-class vessels. The hull is intact. Drives are operational. Weapons are partially operational. The vessel has demonstrated engagement capability at ranges exceeding Keth standard band, assumptions for its apparent mass class. The probability that the vessel is a member of any cataloged civilization is less than 0.003%. The vessel's behavior, defensive posture, non-allied fire pattern, repeated hail attempts, is inconsistent with a combat-oriented first contact. Amend. Observe and catalog. Destroy upon completion only if threat assessment warrants. I want to read that last line carefully. Observe and catalog. Destroy only if threat assessment warrants. They were going to study us before they killed us. This is, I have come to understand, an enormous compliment from the Keth consensus. They have destroyed, across 314 years, everything they have encountered that presented a threat without useful data. They were not going to destroy us until they had the data. This meant they were not going to destroy us right now. The VOR response came 17 minutes later, and it was more direct. Admiral Patriarch Devon Seuss sent a single message on a command priority channel, addressed to the unknown vessel. Tenric translated it. It said, "Fought well, you may withdraw." 4 words, in the VOR standard band. You fought well, you may withdraw. I held that on the screen for what Tenric's log records as 11 seconds. Then I told Borak we needed the drive charged in 30 minutes. And Borak, from the engineering console, with her broken collarbone and her jury-rig distribution manifold, said she'd have it in 20. She had it in 23. The full jump home took 6 seconds. The Seleth crossing disappeared behind us, and we were in compact space, and the medical teams came out of the secured compartments where they'd been operating through the engagement. Petrov began doing what Petrov does. The final count, 214 crew returned home. 217 did not. The Meridian's starboard quarter is gone. 2 of her 8 spinal mounts are destroyed. 1 is jammed. Port dorsal sensors are being rebuilt. Chief Engineer Borak estimates 8 months of repair. The Admiralty has convened 3 review boards since we returned, and I have testified to each of them, and each time I have described the same 4 hours, and each time the board has sat in a silence that I cannot fully read. The first board wanted to know if it was our fault. I told them it was a navigation error, and that I accepted full responsibility for the error, which was the accurate and correct answer, and also that in the specific circumstances of the error, I believe we made the decisions that needed to be made, which was also accurate and also correct. The board noted both statements without resolving the tension between them. This is, I think, what review boards do. The second board wanted to know about Faro. They asked me to characterize her performance, and I told them she was extraordinary, and they asked me to be more specific, and I gave them the weapons track and the targeting log and the response time data from the engagement, and they sat with those numbers in the same silence. I don't know what the second board is recommending. Know that Faro has already been promoted, and that the promotion was correct. The third board wanted to know about the ceasefire. They wanted to understand the mechanism. What, specifically, caused 2 ancient civilizations that have been grinding against each other for 314 years to stop, at that specific moment, in that specific place. I told them I did not fully know. I told them what I observed. It's that both sides encountered something they could not classify, spent 4 hours failing to destroy it, and were left, when it departed, looking at each other across a space that the something they could not classify had occupied. The board found this answer unsatisfying. I understand why. It is also, as best I can reconstruct it, true. What the board wants to know, I think, is whether we made things better or worse. Whether our presence in that kill zone, accidental, unplanned, catastrophically ill-timed, changed something that should not have been changed. Here is what I can tell them. The war between the Vor sovereignty and the Keth dominion did not resume after we left. This is not something I take credit for. The ceasefire at the Seleth crossing was not negotiated. It was not formalized. It was not the result of any intentional diplomacy on our part. What it was, as best I can reconstruct it from the intelligence reports, is this. Both sides came to this Seleth crossing planning to fight each other. And both sides encountered something they could not classify, and both sides spent 4 hours shooting at it and not being able to kill it. And when it finally left, when the full jump fired and the sensor return that had no archive entry disappeared from their boards, both sides were watching the space where it had been. And then they were watching each other. In the space where the thing that no archive could explain had been. The war did not resume that day, or the next month. The intelligence reports say that Keth consensus nodes have been in signal contact with VOR command frequencies. Not negotiations, not treaties, but contact of a kind that has not existed in 314 years. What they are discussing we do not know. What they are both looking toward we can guess. We are small. We are recent. We are irrelevant. Except that we went where we had no right to go, and we stayed longer than we had any right to stay. And we went home damaged in ways that will take 8 months to repair. And we brought 214 of 431 people back instead of 431. And the war between the two largest civilizations in this region of space has, for reasons neither side, has formally communicated to anyone, stopped. Now, I am writing this because someone needs to write it. I am writing it because Petrov has cleared me for light paperwork and the command chair is still occupied by damage control teams, and I need something to do with my good hand. I am writing it because Dasso and the others deserve a record of what happened. Even if the record is only this, that we were there, and we held, and the holding meant something, though not in the way anyone planned. The Meridian will be repaired. Borak has already submitted the materials requisition. Faro has been promoted, and she accepted the promotion with the same directness she brought to the tactical board. Tenrik has been formally cited for the hail sequences. The board acknowledged, as among the more effective first contact communications in compact fleet history, a distinction that Tenrik received with the quiet satisfaction of someone who knows exactly how good he is at his job. I will command the Meridian again when she is repaired. I have been asked, in 3 review board sessions, whether we would have done anything differently if we had known what we were jumping into. Whether, prior knowledge of the engagement at the Seleth crossing, we would have attempted a different approach. I have told each board the same thing. We would have held, we would have hailed, we would have defended, and we would have stayed in that position until either we were destroyed or we permitted to leave, because the alternative, retreating immediately, or choosing a side, or failing to answer the fire, would have communicated something other than what we communicated, and what we communicated was the only true thing we had to offer. That we were there, and we were not leaving, and we were not theirs. Board does not always look satisfied with this answer. I give it anyway, because it is true. Outside this medical bay, the Meridian smells of sealant and burnt metal, and the particular atmosphere scrubber residue that fills a ship when too many sealed compartments have been opened too quickly. She does not yet smell like herself because she is 4 days out of commissioning, and she has spent those 4 days in the hardest place a new ship can go. But she is still here. She held whatever she is going to smell like in a year, in 5 years, 20 years. She earned it at the Seleth crossing, and so did the 214 who came home, and so did the 217 who did not. They had no file on us. They still don't have one that covers everything. Good.